Today we're going to do a brief review of photosynthesis, and some of the details will be left out because of how we presented it in class, but this is specific to our course. Photosynthesis is a process by which some algae, plants, cyanobacteria produce glucose, and they make glucose by combining CO2 and water. They also have a byproduct of oxygen that they give off. To give us some bearings, let's remind ourselves that we're inside of a plant cell, we'll say at this point, and all cells have DNA, and plants happen to have their DNA in a nucleus like we do. This portion out here is called the cytoplasm. And floating around within that cytoplasm, we have lots of things, but we're going to focus on these organelles called chloroplasts. And chloroplasts are where part of this process occurs, called photosynthesis. So the first couple steps happen in the chloroplast, and then the last steps to get to glucose happen in the cytoplasm. We want to remember that we're following energy, and energy isn't lost. It's just going to be kind of converted or transformed. In this process, the energy is going to begin at the sun. The sun is going to cause electrons to start bouncing around. Those electrons and the energy of those electrons are going to be used to create a molecule called ATP. And then ATP is going to be used to take the carbons from CO2 and sort of smash them together to make glucose. And specifically, the energy in the glucose molecule is in the covalent bonds. And of course, we know the covalent bonds are electrons that are being shared. Now, I want to show you another graphic that will, here we go, that will give you an overview of what is happening in photosynthesis. So we have sort of three steps here. This step here is called the light dependent phase. Also, it involves the electron transport chain that you have seen already in mitochondria. The second step is the Calvin cycle, light independent. Carbon fixation is a part of this process. And then the last to get us to a 6-carbon sugar is reverse glycolysis. That is just a term that I have made up to kind of let you know how we go from a 3-carbon sugar to a 6-carbon sugar. As I mentioned, the first two phases are happening in the chloroplast, and this last set of reactions is happening in the cytoplasm. So what I want you to see here is that in step 1, we have the sun and we have water coming into the electron transport chain. What leaves the electron transport chain is ATP, a reduced form of NADP, which now involves an H, so that's the reduced form. And we have oxygen that comes out of this step that's going to really be breathed out, if you will, by plants. ATP and NADPH are now necessary inputs for the Calvin cycle. We also add something else, and that's CO2 that comes from the atmosphere, and it is going to move through pores in the leaf. And also we have, as a part of this cycle, a 5-carbon sugar that comes in. When all of these leave the Calvin cycle, what we produced is a molecule called glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate. and that is a 3-carbon sugar. There need to be several steps to move from the 3-carbon sugar to the 6-carbon glucose, the 3-carbon molecule to a 6-carbon glucose. And so that's what I just call reverse glycolysis. These steps don't necessarily matter, but just remember it's sort of similar to glycolysis in that the glucose molecule that's 6 carbons is broken down into a 3-carbon in glycolysis. We call that pyruvate. That's the overall reaction.